Good morning, and welcome to the second day of the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph's National Gathering, hosted virtually by St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Our conference theme is Meeting the Needs of the Time. For those of you that joined us yesterday, welcome back. And for those joining for the first time today, we welcome you. My name is Martha Malinsky. I am the Executive Director of the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Today's speakers will explore a pedagogy informed by the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Before we get started, a few reminders about technology. All participants are currently on mute. Please keep yourself on mute. We know too that one of the special things about the National Gathering is getting to see and know colleagues. Please keep your camera on as much as possible to help us feel like this is an in-person event, and to add your name, college, or organization to your name at the bottom of your screen. We invite you to also introduce yourself, as some people have already started to do in the chat feature. And thank you to the St. Kate's staff who are making this event possible behind the scenes and providing tech support to make this conference go smoothly. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be available on our website. I want to thank our 9-member campuses and our sponsors whose financial support has made this national gathering possible. Thank you to the St. Paul Province of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet and Consociates, St. Joseph Educational Ministries, the Los Angeles Province of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, Academium, the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield, the Albany Province of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, and finally, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston. We are so pleased that so many of our sponsors can join us for this conference. Thank you for your support. And now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Tony Hayes, President of Regis College.
Good morning, everyone. And good morning, and as we begin a new day. The foundation has been set. Let us seek God's guidance for erecting the structure. Our reflection comes from that all may be one. Let us listen. Kaleidoscope of the little design. A blend of light and ready hearts, imagination captured. Love made manifest in the little design. God's pleading heard by a small group of women. Be love, be joy, be gentle presence. A vocation so sublime, mystical union, love poured out, spirit at work, movements of grace, love known in ready hearts given to God, presence in the little design. A reflection of light, a movement of grace, gifts given. A broken world in need of healing and compassion, in poverty, deprivation, destitution. Love finds the way, the truth is realized. God present in it all, precisely in the need. Shifting light reflects the image. Divide the city, listen, see, together respond to ills. The face of God revealed in the weak, the vulnerable, in every human face. Then an unsettling turn. Darkest night, revolution, love under siege, arrested, imprisoned, suppressed, life threatened and lost. One stands alone in the darkness. With faintest sleight of hand, the alteration of life schemes and all its scopes, a new beginning across the sea, all with a turn of the kaleidoscope. Generation after generation, a shift of reality and circumstance. New beauty, new grace in response to the mission. The amazing little design adapts, alert to the next place for love's revelation, the cry for unity and reconciliation. A kaleidoscope turns, new patterns emerge, nothing is lost. The color and reflection of today's little design, fashioned anew in our times. Generous hearts awake to the needs of a new society. The wonder of the little design. Amen. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Anita Thomas, the Executive Vice President and Provost at St. Catherine's University, to introduce our first speaker for the day. Anita?
Thank you, President Hayes. That was lovely. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited that we are able to gather again for the second day of the National Gathering. It was 2 years ago to the day that I attended the National Gathering that was held at Regis under President Hayes' direction, and learned a lot about the history of the CSJs, the ACSSJ group, and more about our role as educators. We're very excited to start this second day of the gathering, and I want to warn everyone, actually it's more of an invitation, that today will be much more of an interactive process than we had yesterday. The theme of the gathering this year has been meeting the needs of the times, and we developed this as we were thinking about the 4 pandemics or the crises that we have been encountering over the last 16 months. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic, the rise of racial injustice, economic injustice, and civic unrest. What is clear is that all of our institutions continue to have the clarion call that many of us had as our founders decided to develop colleges and universities to help individuals to meet the needs of the time and to help to show the love of the dear neighbor through our education. We have an awesome responsibility as institutions of higher education to really think about outcomes for our students. And we have a great gift in being Catholic institutions, and certainly institutions founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph. As we think about education as a process, being a developmental nature for both individuals and the educational experiences, and as we think about the outcomes of raising, training, and educating students in a holistic and well-rounded fashion so that they become important contributing members of our societies. What is critical is that we think about our foundation, our common values, and ways to really embed the principles, the values, the charisms, and yes, even the maxims from the Sisters of St. Joseph. What we hope to do in these next 2 days is to really focus on our role as institutions towards the development of a pedagogy that's specific to the CSSJ, but more importantly, ways for us to understand better how all of the charisms can play out in our institutions, from recruitment and marketing and admissions, from our academic programs to our co-curricular activities for all. We will be endeavoring over these next 2 days to really think about and learn from each other at all of our institutions how important our foundation is, and to really think about and share ideas around the charisms of the CSJ. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Andrée Leighton this morning, who will kick off our first keynote. She serves as Assistant Professor and Director of the Center for Academic Innovation and Creativity at Mount St. Mary's University. Dr. Leighton also works collaboratively with the university's first seminar program and CSJ Institute. The common thread through all of her work is supporting students, faculty, and staff with integrating the CSSJ heritage in meaningful ways individually and socially. What I will add to her bio that's not written in our program is that Dr. Leighton is a master teacher. In our interactions, I've been able to witness her love and passion for students as embedded in our CSJ charism. You will learn more about the love of the dear neighbor and how well it can be integrated into our curriculum, co-curricular activities for our students. I'm so delighted that she will be keynoting for us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Leighton.
Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you for that very kind and warm welcome. And I want to, especially in beginning, thank Anita and Martha and Mary Galvin and Shannon Green for making this opportunity available today. I'm very grateful to learn and grow together in this way and to have these 3 days to do that. So the presentation is a walkthrough of different assignments and activities that illustrate ways to integrate the CSSJ heritage into coursework and also reflect a student-centered active learning approach. So both of those elements could inform our ongoing conversations about developing a CSSJ pedagogy. And within the CSSJ family, my home institution, Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles. So most of what I'm most familiar with is the CSJ specific. So that shows in the different assignments and activities I'm going to share. And these activities come from introductory political science courses in American government and world politics, and also courses in the Mount's first year seminar program, as Anita mentioned. So to begin, the way I introduce this work with students is to talk about the CSSJ heritage as a living heritage that is available to all, regardless of faith or no faith. So more than once, I've heard the CSJs at the Mount say that the charism is available to all, to any who wish to take it up and live into it. So in my experience, there's a transcendent and universal quality to the charism principles and callings of the that the CSSJs share with us. And I also mentioned to students that the word Catholic has multiple meanings depending on whether it is capitalized or not. So to be Catholic in a universal sense is being very broad and open. So that's in recognition that students come from many different places into the spaces in our classrooms, as well as we ourselves as faculty and staff. So with that as a bit of an introduction, I'll just go into some sharing. So the first couple of activities I'll share are informed by the CSJ calls to action. I'm going to share screen. So is the screen share? Oops.
Looks good.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so the CSJ calls to action come from a congregational chapter meeting in 2013. And at that time, the CSJ gathering came to 5 calls to action. And I have them listed here. They are all unpacked more fully in an 18-page document that the students read. But the focuses of communion within the earth community, church, the people of God, living the CSJ charism, claiming our oneness through relationships and structures for mission, and partnering with new eyes. So from that, with that background and activity from a world politics, so that's what the document looks like as a PDF that the students read. And it shares a preamble and some of the history of the congregation, And each of the calls is detailed with statements of belief, commitment, and action. So students have that coming into this exercise. And then the activity that they do is, this is from an Introduction to World Politics course. They explore the calls to action and how they see them in action. So it's the calls to action in action. How do they see them in action at the Mount, in the world, in their lives and their communities? And we talk about how to broaden the reference point for church as people of God, that refers to any community of people of goodwill. So church in many spaces church can be in many places other than a building or a structure. The church also, when you have people coming together in goodwill, living the CSJ charism, any action that lends itself toward unifying and toward loving, and regard for each other as dear and as neighbors. And then the relationships and structures for mission, those can be specific procedures, institutions, agencies that support that action. And then importantly, partnering with new eyes, especially in the light of meeting the needs of the very dynamic needs of our times, and also living in a globalized world. What are the pathways for reaching out with people that we haven't connected with before, or might even have considered as other in some way? So the students populate this worksheet and this is done usually in a kind of flipped classroom sort of dimension, where it's introduced in class, they work on it outside of class, and then come back into class and do either in a Zoom context, breakout rooms discussing it, and then ultimately a large group sharing. And all of these things, when I've introduced them, they've been in the spirit of experimentation. And certainly I'm learning as much as anything else in how the students are responding. But the common thread in the feedback to this exercise in particular is that the students find it very valuable, like they hadn't thought about connecting things from the spiritual heritage or a consciousness heritage to the political world. And specifically, they're often making connections with the United Nations in this respect, because that's a lot of what we would have been exploring in the course at this point. So that's one activity that's centered with the calls, with bringing the calls to action alive and applying them in different ways. Another activity for the calls to action, this is from the first year seminar course at Mount St. Mary's. And one of the courses in the second semester of the first year seminar program, students take a section that's focused on one of the different pillars of distinction at the Mount that forms the core curriculum. So that's referred to as LACE. And I think in 2019, there was a presentation about the LACE curriculum at the Mount. But one of these pillars is Spirit of the Founders. So for this assignment, this was a semester toward the end of the semester assignment, the students had been oriented to the 5 calls to action and had been working with them throughout the course, integrating in the section that I've taught. It's with a professor in the English department. So we were integrating world literature, political science, and the calls to action. So they would read different selections and content from each of those disciplines that were related to each of the calls to action. At the beginning of the semester, the students also were asked, after they had read the calls to action document, to identify a 6th call that would be personal to them, that they would pursue and cultivate over the course of the semester. So this activity was for them to really present and share their 6th call to action and how it had evolved this is from an accelerated timeframe course, so over 8 weeks, and then making connections between their call and the disciplines they had studied, an opportunity to include a creative expression, and then concluding with a reflection about their growth as self-directed learners. So also inviting them to look at, these are metacognitive kinds of questions as well, and also looking at how are you making the CSJ heritage your own? So giving students the opportunity to express and work, again, making the calls real in their lives and in their worlds. So moving from there, so the calls to action kinds of activities, that's one line. And then another is learning about the history of the Six Sisters going out into the corners of the city in Le Puy. I've just come to refer to that, and Shannon Green knows, has been very supportive with this too, that I refer to it as the Le Puy method, that it's a kind of a form in social science of what's called action research, or collaboration-based community research. Those are two kinds of threads that sort of lend themselves to the kind of action that the sisters engaged in. So in this world politics course, this was during our time with Synchronous, so this was virtual. So they had a field research experience using documentaries through a service, a streaming service that our library makes available to us. And so the idea was meeting the needs of global times. So the students would go out into the global city and learn more about what people need. So there's an introduction to bring them into like the sisters who went out into the streets of Le Puy, were going out into the global village, going out into the global city. And we conducted this exercise with a rhythm of going out into the city and then coming back to the kitchen. So they would go out, they each watched a unique documentary that they chose, so giving them agency and choice in their learning process. So they chose a global issue of interest to them and watched a documentary, and then debriefed back in the kitchen in our Zoom space with their classmates. So, and from there, designed some practical, keeping their own momentum going and identifying ways, some actions that could help address the global issue. So that they went through this exercise that included a pretty thorough debrief from the film, and then our time together in the Zoom kitchen. So again, this was introduced in class. They had time to schedule in watching a documentary, an hour, 2.5, and taking notes, preparing a debrief. And then that was done in class in open forum in the Zoom space. Another application of the Le Puy method of this approach in an American government course has to do, this is a project that I've run a number of times. There's a very small, what's called a pocket park that's adjacent to Mount St. Mary's Doheny campus, and it's part of the Los Angeles Public Parks System, Parks and Recreation Department. And its name is St. James Park. So we do an exercise in what if we were going to redesign the park to better serve the needs of the surrounding community, what might that look like? And so this activity, it's designed to support some key learning outcomes and to live into them. So the spirit of the founders in the CSJ heritage, to experience themselves and each other as part of a living heritage, and to practice Catholic social teaching, the model of see, assess, act, and that's done in collaboration, which is another way of neighboring, of dear neighboring with one another. And then on the political science side, experiencing agency, efficacy, and creativity through community action as service. And then the opportunity to practice action research, critical thinking, and group work, collaboration through group work. This is an aerial view of St. James Park. Thank you, Google Maps. But you can see it's a very simple, small design. And then the process for this activity was the results I'm sharing in this presentation were from a class of students. There were 16 students. They were primarily first-year students from diverse majors, which is very common in the American government and world politics courses. And the students were divided into 4 groups of 4, and they were pre-assigned to mix different majors and different what year, where students were on their trajectory. And it played out in a Tuesday, Thursday class of 90 minutes. And typically there would be course content for the first 45 to 60 minutes, and then project work for the remaining time. And this activity, I'm sharing a version that was done when we were still on the ground, and I'm happy to report I'm conducting it now with my summer class, and it's working just fine virtually with an adaptation where the students are it's an individual project right now for the students, and they're identifying the public park that's closest to their home and that they feel comfortable visiting. So I'll be able to report back how it goes in that format. But that's, so how it played out in time. Introducing students to the Lepuy method. That happens in class, revisiting the 6 sisters. And again, this rhythm of going out into the community and then coming back to the kitchen, letting them know that that was what the rhythm would be, and making active use of the learning management system. At the Mount, we use Canvas, but the students also made use of Google Docs and Google Jamboard for brainstorming. And the first session, the students took an actual field trip to the park, and they could collect their observations, take photos, get a feel for the park, and they completed a field notes worksheet related to that. And then that was in preparation then to prepare for the next session. So this is also this mix of active learning that's flipped classroom, some of the work being done asynchronously to make the maximum use of activity time in the classroom or in the Zoom space. So the students did research about St. James Park. They looked up its history. They had the opportunity to compare it with a personal public park. They learned how to work with census data by zip codes. They watched a PBS video about the role of public parks in American life. And they read a journal article about the role of parks for people in terms of mental health support, community, family, various dimensions that are important to community life. Then they prepared a community stakeholder map, where once they gathered information from the census, they were to put themselves in the shoes of the different demographic groups that they saw displayed in the census, and put the voice of those groups into the circles, and then things they might say or that they might care about in relation to the park into the squares. So this is one of those autofill PDFs where students can type in the park, and then the different, they can put one, 8 people aged 18 to 25, or college students, or young children, those, to give them a voice. What do you imagine might be some of the things that they would care about, or that might enhance the park from in their experience, from their perspective. So then the students, I'm wondering if my slides are jumping too fast. Okay. So yeah, the other piece of work that they had to do was to construct a survey if you were going to administer a survey in the community in that zip code area. So they created a 10-item survey, and it needed to include a mix of closed item questions, Likert scale items, and open item questions. So giving, again, how to get to know a community, more fully, so that however a design would unfold, it would be according to the needs of the times, on the terms of the people who have the needs. So then they also they were responsible in the group work. They each had to come up with something that they were contributing to the park design and what was their rationale for it. So they needed to have a rationale for it that was based on the census data, the video they watched, the article, so that there would be some kind of backing for whatever it was they thought would be a good idea for the park. And then they, as a class as a whole, coming up with ideas for a community involvement activity. So how to invite people to the park and have some kind of a gathering or event that would open things up to the community to start to explore these ideas, and where their ideas could be presented as a starting point, like as something to start conversation, as something generative. And then they would collaborate together to create their final design. And this is kind of taking to the end, so they had their walk in the park, and this is on their final day, and they drew their designs on the whiteboards in the classroom. And then we took pictures of them. The pictures look like that. There we go. So they had the pictures with their different designs and the elements that they included, and they each gave the park some kind of a tagline, a place of peace, serenity, looks like unity and fun. So that is the LePuy method with a public park focus. And the next two that I'm going to share are ones I'm I'm going to try them with my summer class. So they haven't happened yet. So I'll be able to report back once I give these a roll, but I'm interested to see how students might respond. So one is an activity to bring in terms of the Catholic intellectual tradition and the emphasis on a dialogue of faith with reason. I'm interested to see what students might do with an exercise where they choose a social issue, a social political issue that they care about, that's particularly relevant or that they're interested in, and just have a dialogue exercise of making statements of faith, knowing, or trust, what that's spiritually informed in whatever way they relate to spirit, and then putting that with statements of reason, and just seeing what happens as an activity. And this is another one where I think we'll learn a lot together, and I'm just really interested to see what might come forward from that. And then to close out this political science class this semester, a reflection of looking at the Sisters of St. Joseph consensus statement, and this quote about democracy from the late political scientist E.E. Schatzschneider, which is in every syllabus I have. It's actually, when I was introduced to this quote about democracy when I was a first-year student at Cabrini University in Pennsylvania. And it impacted me in such a way that I changed my major from Spanish communications to Spanish political science. So, but I had never read a statement, referring to democracy and its involvement with a love of people. So when I look at the consensus statement and this statement about democracy side by side, I see resonance, and curious to see how students relate to that. So more in terms of the living heritage and having the eyes to see it, and being awake to it in the ways, again, that are unique to each of us. And then I also want to just thank very much. I'm deeply grateful to be serving at an institution that has done so much to lift up the CSJ heritage in so many different ways. You know, from the first year seminar program where students take a CSJ workshop, all the way through to taking integrative scholarship courses, some of which are very purposefully focused on the spirit of the founders, and just the work that's also done toward meaningful assessment of that work. So I'm thankful to Michelle Starkey and the folks who have worked on the curriculum committee, everyone who's worked on developing some of the rubrics that we have. And this is just an example of a rubric that is used in integrative scholarship courses at the Mount that have a spirit of the founders focus as the pillar of emphasis. So just to see that as a reference point, you know, ways to assess student work and have some hinge points to support, to basically see how students are doing, to learn from student experience and to refine as we go, using the rubric kind of one of my colleagues at the Mount refers to rubrics as like flowers. It's like ways to bloom. So that's wanted to share an example of that. And we also have, through the CSJ Institute at the Mount, Shannon Green has compiled a working bibliography of Spirit of the Founders related materials that faculty and staff and Mount community members can access. And they're sectioned into the intellectual tradition, the history of the sisters, Catholic social teaching, films, and the oral history project, which some of you may be familiar with. It's on YouTube. So there's a lot of support. And for myself, coming, you know, I created a sort of mandala. It's just something I open up when I'm preparing for class, or it's just a point of reflection that supports me ongoing in the spirit of unifying love and teaching with that in my heart, in my consciousness. But these points of metacognition, inviting students to metacognition, self-directed learning, integrating the intellectual traditions, social teaching, ever an eye to meeting the needs of the times, transparency, and the CSJ heritage as a living heritage, the Lepuy method, dear neighboring, all we are capable of, and doing that with the spirit of Saint Joseph, the gentleness and joy, and the emphasis on excellence and peace. And there are so many ways. I mean, I've shared some particular disciplinary ways to integrate the heritage. We recently, Meredith Lynch, who's the assistant director for the CSJ Institute at the Mount, we held a showcase of student work that was informed by the CSJ heritage. So we had a student who had created some beautiful poems based on the maxims. And so, you know, so there's endless possibilities and opportunities for creativity and innovation in this area. And my closing encouragement would just be that small hinges swing big doors. You know, so even if you take a moment and think for yourself, what is the next small step for you with integrating the CSSJ heritage into your work, whether that's work as faculty or as staff or administration and the CSSJ community at large. So that concludes, that's my presentation. I might be finished a little early, but happy for any questions. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you all.
Yes, one of the final comments, and they're all coming in, flying in, was that this was an absolutely brilliant presentation. And so I thank you for that. And I'm so delighted that you are all able to hear from Andrée and to really have your creativity stimulated in terms of how we can really build out the CSJ principles in all of our work as an administration in our higher education institutions. We are going to do something slightly different with our time. Each of us will be breaking out into groups, so that we're going to do this 3 times over the next 2 days. Andrée has provided us some facilitating questions to really think about each of the sessions and how they play out. I love that people are starting to think about ideas. Yes, we will have some type of repository for the ideas that Andrée has shared, but also from ideas, because I know that on this call, there are tons of creative ways of really integrating the CSJ charisms into our work. So we will be breaking into groups according to our roles. We have facilitators assigned with the questions that we have from Andrée from this first session. We're going to be in our small groups for 20 minutes, and then we will turn for large group processing and for Q&A for Andrée. So I'll wait till they post the breakout groups. There we go. So we endeavored this yesterday. So you should now have the link to join a breakout group. More ideas to come. So
Anita?
yes.
There's one question I just saw that I would like to address in terms of how students have responded to this. And I have, to date, I have not had any resistance or grudgingness. And that may partly be due to how it's introduced, you know, that I give students a very open way to, I offer a very open way to relate to all of this. So I haven't had any experience of anybody feeling indoctrinated or inflicted upon in any way. Like it's been a very positive, a very warm learning, generative experience to date.
Great. Okay. Looks like everyone has come back. I did get an opportunity to pop into most of the breakout groups. So I hope that you have been just as stimulated by Andrée and her examples as I have. We wanted to make some space for some of the groups to report out ideas that you have shared, and then Andrée can field a couple of questions before we move on to our break and then our second session for the day. And feel free to use the chat to make comments or questions.
I'll make a comment.
Go ahead.
Sue McCauley from Avila. I want to thank my group. Wow, what a wonderful conversation. We came up with some great ideas. And one of the things we realized is that we need to make the connections between helping the dear neighbor, taking care of the environment, whatever our majors are, with the CSJ heritage. That we talk this, we do it, we integrate it, but we have to be more specific about this is the CSJ heritage. So that was one of the things that came out of our group.
I'll add to that. We had a great group. I think that the benefit of having something as universal as unifying love to come back to and to really root in was something that really resonated with our group as something that we could see pointing back to make that intentional connection.
Andrée, thank you both for those comments. I think on the way into the small groups, you were addressing the question that came up about how students respond to this. And I know for many of our campuses, we are becoming much more interfaith and fewer Catholic students. One of the groups talked about having an exercise with the nuns, which are students who come in with absolutely no faith. So Andrée, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I think that some of the groups talked about that sense of unifying love and care for each other. And certainly when you look at the issues that we've been facing since 2020, that need to love, that need to find worth and dignity in others and express that is critically important. But I want to give you space to speak to that again.
Well, I mean, you've really conveyed it, Anita. And it also just, to me, it raises, it's taking some time when introducing the integration of the heritage into any activity and putting it into a universal context, in a context where no matter where somebody is coming into the space, however they're coming, they're welcome, and they find when I look at the heritage and what I know of different faith traditions and no faith, these are universal calls of humanity, universal principles that people devote themselves to, and that have been, from many traditions seen as pathways to leading, what is a good life and how do we get there, not only individually, but together as a society. So with that, and that's why I take so much time with even the calls to action, saying, okay, how can we relate to church people of God? If those words don't necessarily, but it's also another way of referring to a gathering of people in goodwill. So there are different ways that people can make entrance to it from where they are, and that it's also part of what differentiates their education at the particular institution they've chosen. So that it's also in that exposure and making it explicit, the students can also speak in their own way. They can articulate for themselves what Mount education means to them, what is St. Joseph, St. Kate, what all of the, these, what this education means and how it equips them to lead their lives and serve and contribute. So I definitely, as all of us keep, exploring with this, taking that time to introduce it in an inclusive way, I think is yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed that there are comments coming in. The Student Affairs group talked about that many of us probably embed some of the charisms, but don't do it in an explicit way for the students. And as I was listening to you speak, I was really thinking about the importance for all of us as we also move to have our student outcomes be linked to career skills and careers-based outcomes, that there's room for really talking about the importance of values and a values-based approach to education and to the work. If we think certainly about vocational calling and having that as a concept for our students, that all of this becomes really important for us to make sure that we articulating it very clearly so that the students can really talk about that value proposition for their education.
Yes, and if I may add, the other piece that I know we're focused on the student piece of this, but I think it is also important to remember, and this was another piece to that conversation, that we as a community of faculty and staff also need to have an understanding about how it intersects with our own work and how we are able to see it in our own lives. And so there were some who shared sort of the analogy of once you have this kind of an experience or an immersion or understanding about the charism of the SSJ or the CSJ, that you kind of walk in their footsteps, if you will, and that you find yourself embracing these values and the charism in your everyday life. And then we had some who could look at it from the lens of an alum, where it then influences how you put together your curriculum for your course, how you do that discernment in the classroom or with your colleagues through conversation. And then just having some opportunity, when we looked at what tools do we need, having some opportunity for development of tools to be able to use sort of like a toolkit, like what Andrée has presented to us today, that are very practical. And then someone shared just even taking a few moments prior to a meeting or a class or something like that, to actually call out what those connections are.
Thanks for those comments, Linda.
And I should mention one other thing.
Go
The
ahead.
development of lay leadership was also
Yes.
very much present in the conversation.
Great. Thanks for sharing those points. I will say that this national gathering is a selfish gathering for me. I did have a not so covert motivation for us really to come together as a community and to think about sharing professional development practices and ideas, really sharing ways that we communicate to our students the value of a CSJ education, but more importantly, really building those bridges amongst all of us. I know that there are thanks coming into Martha Malinsky for being our executive director and coordinating this gathering and really focusing on the work. I'm hoping that this is just part one of more work that we will be able to continue to share. So on that note, Andrée, I'll let you say and do a final word. We will take a break for 30 minutes. When we come back, we're going to dive into, just for a short time, more specifically Catholic social teaching and Catholic intellectual tradition as it relates to our work. But we're going to go right back into those breakout sessions with more questions to finish this work for this morning. So Andrée.
Anita, may I just have one thing to say, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It's
go ahead,
Carol Helms. So we started off yesterday with the consensus statement, and I just want to read the opening line. Stimulated by the Holy Spirit of love and receptive to the inspiration, we move always forward to profound love of God and love of neighbor without distinction. And if that wasn't embraced and shown today, so I thank you.
Thank you for that. Andrée, I knew you would be fabulous. So
I don't, yeah, there's not, thank you very much, Sister Carol. That does it. That's a beautiful point to end. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you all. And I'm available. Please reach out. I'm available.
And we'll still be present this morning as we continue to wrap up. So we will be back at, I don't have the script in front of me, so I'm going to do the times. Noon Central Time, 1, yes, Eastern Time, and then 11, I'm guessing, on Pacific Time. You know where we are. 30 minutes. We will regroup and continue. You can stay online or take a break. Everyone, take care of yourselves. Well, it is 12 noon. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we will go ahead and get started. We appreciate the comments and the remarks that are coming in about the first session, and hope that you find that this session will also be a way to stimulate your creativity and for us to continue to move, to think about the CSJ charisms and how they play out in our work. As I was listening to Andrée and some of the comments, I was channeling my president, Becky Roloff. As you know, St. Catherine is a women's institution primarily, and like many of your institutions, has a liberal arts foundation. And Becky always talks about our traditions and our legacy in 3 ways. It really is the Catholic piece, ties us all to a sense of social justice and making changes to empower others to change the world. That the women-centered piece of us really helps to foster resilience and to help in the tradition of the CSJs, women to be all that they can be. But she talks about the liberal arts base as really that problem-solving base. And that stays with me as an important piece of our foundation as institutions. We certainly live in a time where we need to educate individuals to engage in problem solving on both an individual, more localized level, but also in a global fashion and in a global way. And one of the benefits of being Catholic institutions is that we have a little bit more freedom to talk about our mission and to talk about values as it plays out. I'm fond of talking about the sense of vocational calling, that for all of us, coming to work at a CSJ institution allows us to bond and connect with students in a way where we can share our values and really promote the love of dear neighbor in a way that really helps to make sustaining change in our world. So I want to start just briefly and reintroduce, sort of ground us on Catholic social teaching and Catholic intellectual tradition. We are then going to go right back into our breakout groups. We have another set of facilitating questions that will really help us again to think about more specifically how CST and CIT plays a role in our institutions. Marie Lynn Miranda, who is the provost at Notre Dame, gave a keynote address at the American Catholic Colleges and Universities conference this February. And she talked a lot about the values that Catholic educational institutions share. I wanted to sort of start with this as a grounding and then look at how it relates to our CSSJ values, and then move into Catholic social teaching principles. What I found interesting about Dr. Miranda's thinking is that really grounding all of the aspects of both what we expect for the student experiences, but also how it plays out in our roles as faculty in terms of teaching and scholarship and service, and staff and administrators in helping with student life experiences in a holistic perspective for our students. There really is this sense of the need from an educational mission perspective to do a holistic work with our students, to really think about the development of the mind and the body and the spirit of every student. I was raised as a Jesuit, I always say raised, but educated at Loyola, and really think of myself as a Jesuit. And that holistic sense, I think, is really critically important. We are finding ourselves today with students who are coming in from diverse backgrounds in ways that is increasing in diversity across our institutions. We're certainly finding that our students are presenting with more mental health issues and concerns. And that was before COVID-19, which has ramped up the sense of stress, social isolation, depression, and anxiety in all of us, faculty, staff, administrators, and students. And so to really think about, are we living out that sense of educational mission and really helping in a holistic fashion to work with our students? The idea of a research mission and a research base, and really thinking about that sense of discovery. One of the outcomes that we talk a lot about across our institutions is that need for critical inquiry. And if you think about the LePuy method, what Andrée really is doing with her students is saying, here's an issue, here's an area, go explore. And explore not in a way that's coming just from an individualistic perspective, but one that leads to that sense of creativity and connection in relationship in a way that really fosters that sense of discovery. And I think really thinking about the natural world and our connection to it, thinking about the human condition as a whole and the importance of our students' problem solving makes it critical that we endeavor to think about that research mission to serve the world. Following that, then, certainly 2020 has led us to understand the importance of a just society and community. We've been talking a lot about human rights and dignity and Black Lives Matters, really understanding our sense of connection to others. It's the best time for us really in Catholic education to really be thinking about how do we embrace ending oppression, how do we embrace anti-racism work in our curriculum, and how do we build societies that are really reflective of justice. And then finally, thinking about that sense of vocational calling, what does feed ourselves? What's intellectually challenging and interesting? How do we feed our souls? Many individuals at St. Kate's will hear me often go on a rant about the outcomes for our students. We've certainly been thinking about their degree programs and their majors and the academic content and trying to integrate that a little bit more into the co-curricular experiences, service learning, community engagement for our students. But where we should excel as Catholic institutions is that sense of feeding the soul, having conversations with our students about their sense of passion, helping them as they foster resilience, to think about their careers, to think about their work in civic engagement, and to think about the ways that they will improve the world. it's critical for us to really be thinking about feeding the soul of our students. It goes without saying that we need to engage in feeding the souls of ourselves, and we'll talk a lot about that as well. So you can see similarities in what Dr. Miranda pulls out with Catholic values to what we have decided are the important CSSJ values, and you'll find that on the website. Really thinking about creating hospitable and caring campus communities. I think the COVID pandemic challenged us to really think differently about building communities. And I hope that in the next 2 sessions, we can spend some time thinking about the lessons that we learned and how we continue to promote that. Of course, the love of dear neighbor without distinction, drawing from the love of God, is an important value and characteristic. And you can see that when you think about Catholic education really being essential to what we should be doing. The need for addressing the needs of the times. I always think about how we are preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet. We also now need to start thinking about preparing our students for a society that we are dreaming, that we think would be optimal, that we think would be respectful of all humans, and really helping them with concrete skills to be able to endeavor in that work. Striving for excellence in all of our endeavors. So happy to see as many of the CSJs on the call with us. The legacy of excellence doesn't need to have words to it. We really, though, do need to continue to work with our students and to strive for excellence. And then really working to make a difference in the local and the world community. I think all of us use global in our language in terms of outcomes for students, thinking about inclusive excellence and cultural fluency. But global and local are pretty much interchangeable today. And I think we have to help our students to really think about outcomes that really help with the localized perspective of self in context, but also with that global sense and really thinking about the world. So then I do not want to spend a lot of time on the Catholic social teaching principles, although I often will tease faculty about they're not pedagogical strategies, but really values that the Catholic Church has asked us as educational institutions to embrace. But one of the questions that we will be endeavoring to answer in our small groups is really, how are we living out the Catholic social teaching principles in our institutions? Life and dignity of the human person is critical as we think about the dignity and worth of individuals. It certainly should point us to a sense of ethics and moral values and providing a moral vision for our students. The call to family, community, and participation. These are traditions that proclaim that the person is not only sacred, but also social. The Catholic social tradition here teaches us that human beings grow and achieve fulfillment in community. We certainly saw that in COVID-19 and that sense of isolation that all of us felt. The need for Zoom connections and Zoom happy hours and family calls and meetings. And certainly as we've been increasing our vaccination rates, the videos, the pictures of people actually being able to touch each other, of grandparents being able to hug grandchildren, certainly takes us back to the need for us as an institution to really value that sense of community and participation and to have that play out in every aspect of our work. Rights and responsibilities and thinking about how human dignity needs to be protected so that we can have healthy communities and endeavor in maintaining basic human rights. The option for the poor and the vulnerable. This should be a basic moral test for us. We certainly, in the last several years and today are actually seeing reports on children who have been separated from their parents at the border. We certainly can think about poverty and health disparities and differential outcome rates as part of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've even started thinking about and looking at how women have been differentially impacted by COVID and the economic impact on the workforce, balancing of family responsibilities and child rearing. And those are important issues that the church has asked us to address. The dignity and work and rights of the workers, and certainly thinking about rights promoting a fair and healthy economy, one that protects human life, defends human rights, and advances the well-being of all. This is an area that I think is a personal passion of mine. And as we think about preparing our students, not just for the launch and leaving our institutions, but really moral and ethical corporate responsibility as they engage in their work needs to be highlighted. That sense of solidarity, learning to love the dear neighbor and understanding how it connects to our global dimensions and an interdependent world. And then finally, that sense of care for God's creation. We're having record heat here in St. Paul, so I don't know if it's better to be virtual or not, on day 6 in temperatures of 90 and above, but certainly thinking about climate change, global climate concerns, our care for the earth really are critically important for us. All of this, of course, has implications for how we think about our education. We need to prepare students for ethical and moral dimensions of professional practice and good citizenship. Sometimes that comes in one. Your vocational calling, your sense of career can help you as you think about citizenship. But all of us as ACSSJ institutions need to be thinking about the role of civic engagement and community engagement for our students. Are we helping students to approach careers as vocations in the service for the common good? And what does it mean for us as we prepare students for positions to really be thinking about moral and ethical social responsibility? And then what are we doing to help students to think about responsibility to contribute to society? I worry a lot about the upcoming generations, the Gen Z, the iGen generation, for a couple of reasons. They are really engaged in more passive learning styles and pedagogy. The individuals that we have between the ages of 8 and 25 have only been educated through applications on computers and through technology. And what we're seeing from that are that sense of global isolation and social isolation. We need to really think about their ways of learning, how that was impacted by COVID-19 and their connection to others, and really work to foster that sense of responsibility to contributing to society, to leaving a legacy and helping the world to be a better place. All right. That then lands us on how does that happen through the Catholic intellectual tradition. I like this intro to CIT as it really helps us to connect those Catholic social teaching principles and our work in really thinking about what are the strategies that we use both inside and outside of the classroom to promote social responsibility with our students. Catholic intellectual tradition is optimistic and joyous about what it means to be human. I think that's critical after the pandemic to really think about all of the strengths, the worth and dignity of others just because they're a creation of God, for us to impart and to think about with our students. It's transcendent and challenging about how we understand ourselves as spiritual beings. I know in the small groups that we've already started talking about how do we look at some of these principles with students who are not necessarily Catholic or who are a-religious or who claim not to have a particular spiritual heritage. What's important for us is that students, all of us as humans, have spiritual needs that need to be addressed in our curriculum and as part of our co-curricular offerings. We really need to think about helping students with that sense of transcendence, the common good, and the sense of greater good. It's sacramental and celebratory in its affirmation of our dignity. We just have worth just for being children of God. It's integrative and inclusive in its desire to spread the good news. And it's creative and multicultural in its vision on how God is present to the human experience. Oh, I did need you, Mary. So if you think about the Catholic intellectual tradition on a pillar, starting with the sense of the innovation for the common good, that we all need to think about that sense of social responsibility and the importance of maintaining our connection, our communities, and that global perspective, followed by the importance of the dignity of the human person. I think I've said that at least 12 times in this brief presentation, but we really need to be thinking about how do we foster resilience? How do we empower our students so that their sense of human dignity is preserved and elevated and affirmed while maintaining that sense of common good, that sense of global perspective, the development of cultural fluency, and other types of inclusive excellence outcomes. All of that then gets tied to the important components to Catholic intellectual tradition. We alluded to faith and reason earlier. I think Andrée talked about that in her session. If we think about faith as a form of knowledge, juxtaposed with reason, which leads us to our sense of rational inquiry, scientific method, exploration, it's important to teach our students and for us to work with the balance of understanding the illuminating dialogue between faith and reason. They do not have to be mutually exclusive. And we should be helping students to engage in rational inquiry with a sense of faith traditions, spiritual formation, as they develop their sense of vocational calling. We think about the connection to being integral to the Catholic Church. The church and the academy should be united in the endeavor of advancing the common good of humanity. As higher ed institutions, we really have to be thinking about the principles and the dignity of love, as Sister Carol so aptly read for us as part of the covenant. Hospitality and tradition, I think these are the cornerstones of how we see ourselves as higher education institutions. That sense of openness and warmth should be reflected in our scholarship, in our service, and all of our academic pursuits. We need to welcome questions and dialogue that comes from understanding of one's identity, along with understanding fully each other. The ultimate goal of our sense of hospitality and tradition really is in modeling civility, something that we did not see earlier and through our election period, but the importance of thinking about civility in our conversations, civility in our commitments, and civility in our priorities. The sacramental vision really talks about the habit of mind of Catholic imagination to see all that exists as opportunities for wonder, delight, fascination, insight, and an invitation to know something we cannot see. We had an incident management team at St. Kate's when we started to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and made the decision to take our educational services online. And President Roloff, throughout the COVID-19 experience, talked about the wonderful, great adventure that we were on. I will confess as the academic officer that I was not often thinking about the stress of faculty, the stress of students and learning as a great adventure. But I certainly appreciate how President Roloff really embodied that sense of wonder and fascination and insight. And it forced me always to think about the lessons that I was learning as we were endeavoring to sometimes make difficult leadership decisions. But as our faculty were really working with students and our staff were really thinking about the student life experience through that period. And that, of course, then leads us to that sense of the power of beauty. We have to see the aesthetic in everything that we do and to help our students and our community to be embedded in that sense of aesthetic and beauty. That, of course, then takes us to the appreciation of creation and the study of the physical world. There are truths that are revealed and scientifically tested in fields like biology and chemistry and physics and mathematics. And we really need to help that intersection of, again, faith and reason, that sense of science and the appreciation of creation as they endeavor together. All of that, of course, then helps us to help our students to understand and to really think about pedagogical strategies based on the important teachings that we offer. So we have a set of questions about how the Catholic social teaching principles and the Catholic intellectual tradition play out in our work. So we are now going to move back into our breakout sessions. Waiting for everyone to zoom back in. Sorry for that. We were trying to figure out how to extend you more time. As I was being a voyeur on each of the groups, I cannot wait to see these Google Docs because I think I just landed with the social sciences group. That was the best dialogue that we've had. I want to take this opportunity to allow the facilitators to share any updates, insights from your group process. Will never be enough time, Mary. It's not a problem.
I'll speak for group 7. Wonderful people in this group, great conversation and dialogue. What we identified was that, where am I? So often, all of this is embedded, not only in the core and in our majors and the way we work with students, but once again, we have to be more intentional about making that connection. Yeah. Someone said that, you know, they went to CSJ schools in high school and taught in college and everything, and that they had never heard about the Dear Neighbor. But it was so infused that when she finally is teaching on the college campus now, she's like, well, of course, that's what it all was. So we just need to be more intentional.
And I was hearing in some of the groups that tension between naming it, you know, the difference between the big C and the little c Catholic and the affiliation with the Catholic Church, and thinking about where we are contextually with the church and our times and the needs. But I think if we don't start to name things more intentionally, especially for this next generation who seems to want purpose and alignment with passion and alignment with their identity in ways that I think will be new, for many of us, that we'll end up losing the students and not helping them in that developmental process.
Yeah, I'll chime in from group 3. I think to your point, Provost Thomas, was really how we ended the conversation about the identity work of the CSJ and how that really enriched what we felt was a much broader, more inclusive invitation in the Catholic tradition. And really we compared and contrast some of the experiences that some of us had at other Catholic institutions, and to the comment of big C, little c. So I think there's just a richness here because of our CSJ heritage that you may not find in some other institutions.
Thanks for that, John. I know there were some discussions in the faculty group suddenly like, wait, what is admissions doing in terms of recruitment, and how much do we talk about the CSJs and their legacy and the types of then learning experiences that will occur for students on campus. So I appreciate you sharing those feedback. Other groups?
Anita, I can share, I think, group 1, the student affairs colleagues. In listening to our discussion today, I'm thinking of Joan Hurt's book, Where You Work Matters. And there's a chapter in that book about the interpreters. When you work at a faith-based institution, how do student affairs professionals navigate that? And I could sense that our group was no less committed to tenets of the Catholic intellectual tradition, like committed to the common good was referenced specifically by our group, the dignity and respect of others. But I think I agree with some of the other comments that were shared. I think it's the terminology that sometimes trips us up to when we get into a space where we're talking about things Catholic, that we see our work more as a lived embodiment of the charism of the institution, and I think sometimes it's a challenge for all of us when we bring up big terms: Catholic social teaching, Catholic intellectual tradition.
Thanks for that, Matt. I do think the language and the jargon is important to sort of think about it. As something that you said outside of downloading a new book to read. Thanks, Matt. Something you said really made me think about the need to answer those big questions and to do it in a way that they can come to us, especially student affairs professionals, to really be vulnerable and to share some of their thoughts and their thinking. So it'll be important for us to really think about how do we foster that sense of critical inquiry and that exploration without being intimidating or using too much jargon or speak, or tying in a way that might be offensive to other students.
Yeah.
Someone else is going to share.
Hi, this is Joyce Hampton, and I was privileged to be with the Faculty Arts and Humanities group, and ideas a mile a minute. And so just taking a look at some of the things I wanted to share out from this particular group. One idea was the idea, thinking about Catholic social teaching. Many of the people have been involved in first-year seminars or mission-based courses within the curriculum, and how important to be able to take those ideas, make sure that they're introduced in a way that is understood and embraced by those that are coming in with a Catholic background and those that are coming in and just really understanding about what Catholic social teaching means to each one as a human. So that was one idea. And the other thing that I put out there was, how do we see it visualized? And we see it visualized within the curriculum, but also co-curriculum. We think about, our student service staff, our TRIO programs, that is living out the Catholic social teaching on an institution. And then finally, I wanted to share, this particular group had the ideas around, when you are looking at the impact on curriculum. And so it can be on a course level, it can be on a major level, it can be on a minor level. And so we talked a little bit about one institution, how criminal justice and that major changed when it began to think about restorative justice principles and pieces like that. And so how that really impacts the larger institution. So it was a fun group.
Great. I think I didn't make it to your group because we didn't have enough time. So thank you for that summary. It does sound like a very rich discussion.
I was campus ministry mission officers, and I'm Carol from Elms. And, I think the one weaving thread of the piece of lace is in the interdisciplinary emanates from the CSSJ charism. And that it is our task to identify that and to set that strategy forth in the areas of which we work. And for some of us, that means a little more broad base, that, you work with a larger span of the community at the college. So if I was to pick one thing, I think it was sort of the last gong as we were emanating out of the meeting, is that the interdisciplinariness really it emanates really from who the Sisters of St. Joseph are, and how we're tasked with expanding that legacy going forth.
Thank you, Sister Carol, for that. For some reason, your thoughts made me think about spiritual gifts. When you really think about that interdisciplinary work and perspective, and how each of us has our own individual strengths, talents, abilities, that sense of calling, that as you go through the 7 principles for Catholic social teaching and think about, we're going to pick one large world problem or social issue. Clean water stays with me as an example. That it really does pull all of our own individual talents and perspectives to that. It brings a sense of multiple ideas from a variety of disciplines to really be able to solve that. And I'm hoping and I'm thinking that you all are seeing the challenge for us as we're training young people today, that we need to really think about that sense of leadership and how that plays out in interdisciplinary teachings and training. So thank you for that sharing. I don't know if Denise, who else was doing the academic administrators group?
Our group actually talked a whole lot about curriculum structure, curriculum revision processes, and ways that the charism of the sisters and the principles of Catholic social teaching find their way and have continued to find their way in the design of curriculum on our campuses.
Great. I knew that you all would have an assessment lens to bring to that as well. And are we really measuring and thinking about what we're teaching and moving in that direction?
They were patient with me.
Any other final comments or? I think I've gotten all the groups and the breakout rooms. Well, I hope that you have been stimulated throughout this morning and afternoon session. It really is wonderful to hear all of the ideas about really living into our founders and our legacy as a way for us to continue to educate our students. Tomorrow, we will be really digging more into thinking about some of the specific charisms and how that plays out for us. You know, one of the things for me, when I think about a Jesuit institution, is that students come to campus sometimes through admissions interviews, writing about what the social justice legacy of a Jesuit tradition would mean, but certainly by the end that they would leave with that. And as I have onboarded and settled into here at St. Kate's, a CSJ institution, and I have the pleasure of being able to interact with a lot of the sisters, the power of that legacy, but also the power of that work, the legislative advocacy and activities that that all of us engage in, I think is really incredibly powerful. One of the groups was really talking about that balance of the sense of faith and reason. And as we have certainly as a country in a lot of ways really moved to a much more polarized perspective, I think young people are really wanting to know where the gray lies. And I think that our institutions really can help with that sense of balancing of faith and reason, but also thinking about the middle, the continuum on a variety of aspects. I'm looking forward to the products and the continuing sharing that will come as a part of this work of the gathering. We are now going to take a brief break and come back. We have a virtual receptions again scheduled in 15 minutes. Martha, I'm going to turn it over to you for any final instructions that we may have.
Yes, well, thank you, Anita, and thank you to all the breakout group facilitators as well. We will resume with a virtual reception back here at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, and 11:30 Pacific time. We'll break up into new breakout rooms, so you'll get to meet other people as well that will be randomly selected. So we look forward to seeing you back then. Oh, Andrée, I see you have a question. Yeah. So before we break, maybe I
just wanted to invite us all during this break too, that amidst, you know, some of the things we've been exploring have a depth and intensity to them, and also just invite us to open up to the joy that's present in this opportunity to work together, to co-create together, and in that kind of Isaiah spirit of that we're making something new. Yeah.
An excellent reminder. And joy, as we all know, is contagious. So that's an excellent way to send us off into a break and come back together to be in community. Well, welcome back. In yesterday's virtual reception, I shared how the St. Joseph Educational Ministries are meeting the needs of the time. So too are today's virtual reception sponsors, the St. Paul Province of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. When they first arrived in Minnesota from St. Louis, they saw a need to open a day and boarding school for girls. And then just a few years later, when the cholera epidemic broke out 2 years later, sisters turned the school into Minnesota's first hospital. After the cholera epidemic, many children were left orphaned. Seeing a need, they started an orphanage. This pattern of meeting the needs of the time have been repeated over and over again, with the opening of over 100 schools, including St. Catherine University, who is hosting our national gathering, and whose campus sits just next to the Sisters of St. Joseph, St. Paul Province site. They have founded more than 50 social service and spirituality programs. Today, consociates and partners in ministry join the sisters in working in the areas of spirituality, education, healthcare, and social justice, including Celeste Dream, Wisdom Ways, Good Ground Press, St. Joseph Worker Program, Carondelet Village, Sarah's Oasis, and St. Mary's Health Clinics, just to name a few. Thank you to the St. Paul for meeting the needs of the time and for being a sponsor of this national gathering and our virtual reception now. We are so grateful for your support. Now I'd like to introduce Sister Susan Hames, who would like to share a few words.
Good afternoon to all of you. I want to just express on behalf of the other sisters and consociates who are here and a part of the gathering, and all of us, how glad and grateful we are for the existence of this organization, for all of us, this collaborative together, and for this opportunity to thank you for the opportunity to be together and to think together about these things and about our future together, to plan and to plant seeds for what we can become all the more together. Thank you. The participation has been a gift for us, and an adventure in learning continuing. And I want to take this opportunity also on behalf of the province to thank Becky and Anita and all of the senior team and all of the wonderful people from St. Catherine University next door who are sponsoring this event this year, and say how glad and grateful we are for your sponsorship and your leadership in so many ways for us and among us and with us. Thank you for the wonderful partners that you are. And thank you to all of you. It's great to be with you in this venue and to renew relationships. I'm seeing people from Mount St. Mary's I was with in campus ministry years ago. I won't say how many. And it's wonderful to be together and to work together in this way. So thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Sister Susan. It is so wonderful to be together with colleagues, and it's such an honor to be with all of you today. This next virtual reception is more informal time. We'd love to share with each other, introduce yourselves to each other, share a few things about what are you thinking about? What did you hear today from speakers or in your breakout groups? Or you can totally shift gears and take a fun approach about what fun plans do you have for the summer, or some other good icebreaker questions that the group would have for each other. So in just a few minutes, Mary will open up the breakout rooms and you can decide. Mary, are we picking breakout rooms or are we just assigning them?
You're going to be magically swept into a room.
Perfect. So here you go, and we'll see you soon.